Well, after seeing Dune Part One, I, it's not a movie that I hated or anything, but it was a movie that I felt rather underwhelmed by, despite the grand spectacle that it presents. And there's a lot of cool things about it. There's the intriguing nature of the story of Dune that plays out there, and but it just suddenly it stops because it has to. In this is that it's a long, drawn out story. There's elements that's going to take quite a bit of time to do it justice, and most notably in the David Lynch movie, which I always loved. It's weird and bizarre, which is saying something because it's the most normal film that David Lynch has done, despite being in outer space and all that. But still, there was a lot about it in the soundtrack. I adore that sound. That theme it's really great, and you're never going to top that. As far as what's being presented here, which is all this Hans Zimmer in his ambient music mood or mode or what have you, which what he seems to be doing these days. But anyway, but one of the weak parts of it was the relationship for Paul and Chani, in that it seems rather rushed in it, and it's just they got together. But there's only so much time, and yet overall I think it's more of a solid film. And that the initial story, the betrayal of the House of Atreides, the Harkonnens come back to power, Paul discovers his abilities, and he grows into being the leader of the Fremen, and they retake the planet from the Harkonnens, and that's where it ends. Of course, the story goes on, but we never got that in any other medium other than, I don't know, the miniseries. I only saw a couple of episodes of that one, and I don't know that they pursued any further than that. I can't remember beyond what happens after Paul takes power. But anywho, so saw this one, and the production design and all that is just staggering to behold. There's a lot of visual achievements in the film, but it was very slow. I was very rather bored with it, and Bland is like, man, I really want to praise this more than I'm capable, but I couldn't. Well, it's been split in two parts because, and you can understand that because of the story, how it goes. But can you make that a satisfying film unto itself? No, you can't. This film, the first part one, is utterly dependent on part two. But then again, that's implied in how you title it. So part two, okay, here comes part two. It's going to put it together, and it's going to save it, and to a certain extent, plot wise, that's true. And I mean, if you're familiar with the story, I didn't read the books. That's where I come from. I knew the Lynch film. That's what I knew, and so the plot points are all there. It's very similar in that sense, of course. And but I knew where this was going to go and where it ends, and how they get there. So, oh yeah, they're doing this. Oh, that's right, he's got to do that, and that sort of thing plays out. And some of it's interesting, and some of it's good how they handled it. But ultimately, the same thing. But I mean, a good bit of it, I think it would be a long movie to do it in one. But I just think there are other things that are unnecessary, and he could have made that more solid. But it's still the same problem. There's a lot of blandness to it. There's a lot of a slog a bit, and somewhat unsatisfying. So it's a bit more than the first one, but not by much. But overall, the story is there. One of the criticisms of the Lynch movie was that he pretty much establishes that Paul Atreides really is the Messiah, that he really was this mystical character beyond what the Bene Gesserit set up. And here, which it's not much of a difference in that aspect of it. I mean, I guess you could come to your own conclusions about that. You could argue the Bene Gesserit think they're in control, but actually it's God who controls it all. And the prophecy really is. They think they're instrumental in setting it up, but they did, they're the tools of fate and all that, what have you. And but that plays out in it. There were subtle differences in that there appears to be this split among the Fremen between the North and the South, where the Southern Fremen are more devout in their religious beliefs, and then you have Chani, who doesn't believe in any of it, and this stays with her even when she falls in love with Paul, but she wants him all to herself and doesn't like him getting taken with this movement. But Paul himself wasn't quite, he didn't believe it. It seems like he really has accepted the role here, but it was a means to an end. He says, look, we have a common enemy. We can take this back against the Harkonnens. I can get revenge for what he did to my father, so on and so forth, and then punish the emperor, which he, spoiler, he does, but he needed this Fremen army to do it, along with the survivors of his soldiers and whatnot, when the final battle takes place. And but they did this thing where she's just comes across like, I mean, the presentation of her as being part of his training and getting him to understand the environment and everything like that, that's all well and good, and that would make sense. She's lived all that, and she knows it's going to know it more, even though he seems to know our ways, that kind of thing. But yeah, that all made sense and everything. Still, there's, Zendaya is a very small, toothpick-limbed female doing rather brutal takedowns of other people that are bigger than her. Yeah, come on. Good with weapons and stuff, you're solid and fine. Sneaking up on people like they do, they come out of the sand and, cut your tendons and what have you, that kind of thing. Yeah, but it goes a bit, but not too much overboard as I've seen in other movies as far as that goes. But ultimately, where there's a jealousy and selfishness in her that dominates her thinking when it comes to him being taken with this messianic position that he finds himself in. And then ultimately, knowing that this was the goal, to take down their enemies, so it's kind of odd that it's like she wants to run away from it all. I mean, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? The Harkonnens want to kill you anyway, this is it. And then finally, of course, in order to try to make a deal with the governing houses, was to marry the emperor's daughter, which he accepts. And then, she's pissed off. She runs away. But within that, the nature of the culture, and I didn't read the books, but as I understand it, she didn't throw a fit and run off and leave him at the end of that story. Whereas here she does. And it just seems like this is more of a modern influence on this of her standing by her man is some sort of anti-feminist reality or what have you, even though she's grown up in this culture and how it plays out. And even though you have the whole scenario is that this cult of these women, the sisterhood, are the actual power players of this whole thing, and vying between themselves, where now Paul's mother is the top dog there, he looks like, when they were all treating her as kind of less than the rest of them. But she wins out in the end through him. And all of that is a more complex and a more of an allusion to the original ideas of medieval kingdoms and whatnot, and how houses would, through marriage, unite and form alliances and that sort of thing. Is what's playing out here in this space stage scenario. So it's just too much on the nose for that it really throws it off, where she's just frowning all the time. And I don't know, at the end she's calling the worm and she's mad. But that's the deal, and that ultimately, yeah, he his only true love is her. He's not in love with the princess that's going to be the new queen or what have you. When he marries with her for the political reasons of all of that, and that's all it is. And this happened all the time in medieval unions and whatnot, which is what this takes from. I can see why people were upset. And it's like, oh, I can see where they're going with this, and she's just got to be upset. The jealousy of another woman into it, even though she would have an understanding, okay, but they already had her set up as upset with him because of him pursuing basically his fate and his leadership. But other than that, what else was he supposed to do? I mean, the military mission was just as deadly as drinking the water of life was, which, of course, ordinarily meant what. But there was plenty of reason for him to believe that he could survive that, and he needed to do it because he couldn't see his visions. But once he did, he was completely convinced of them, But he did, and so she's upset that he did. But then to move forward, it's all about herself. There is the attitude she puts out there, and it's kind of hard to like her after that point. And of course, why is it like that when it wasn't in the, obviously in the first movie, and apparently that's not how the story plays out in the book. So why deviate from that beyond the typical, gender swaps, race swaps, and stuff like that they do in these movies? But here to do that, and of course, why. And so this element has to just, put its stamp on the telling of this story. And with the hopes that this movie is so successful that there'll be a third one where we finally get more of the Dune story, whereas previous attempts in film and television and what have you, it never got to that point. But then you do something like this, and in this era where people, they get the slightest whiff, even when it's absolutely unfair, of wokeism, it can doom your whole plans, your whole franchise, or what have you. So, and plus, it's one of those things that just, they're doing this, is this the message now? Is this what I'm supposed to be thinking? And it just kicks you right out of the movie, which is the absolute last thing you want to have happen. So I've seen far worse, far blatant, and just badly handled elements of this nature. But overall, it's more of the same problems I've had with the first part, in that I'm like, how much longer is this? It kind of bored me. And granted, it was never meant to be a movie akin to Star Wars, which borrows heavily from Dune and stuff like that, but in its own, high adventure type approach to storytelling. Certainly not a Star Trek or any of that. And I understood that going in, but when it comes to adaptation, into another medium, you have to understand that medium and the time it takes and how much you're asking your audience to go through very long, drawn-out scenes and whatnot, and figure out, can I reach the point here in a shorter manner? And every opportunity to do that, and how you frame the shot, and how you angle this, and what the dialogue would be. And yes, you do need dialogue. Apparently he talked down dialogue, but maybe that was a mistranslation of what his point was, that he was more fascinated with visuals. And he clearly is, maybe not color, but certainly some great visuals in it. It's incredible to behold that. He did excellent work on that, and how weird and surreal it looks. And a lot of it's reminiscent of sci-fi paintings from Heavy Metal magazine and stuff like that. Yeah, there was other stuff beyond the naked girls. I know that was the main reason. But they had a lot of other cool stuff, and just weird, bizarre, the European artist's approach to comic book work and that sort of thing in Heavy Metal magazine. And so Dune looks a lot like that in a lot of ways. But still, I think there's a lot of failure on that part of a flaw too big. Had this been a series, like something they put on for HBO or Max or what have you, some of this would be somewhat forgiving in that each episode is concentrating on this element of this part of the story as you're going for the final big spectacular fights and whatnot, that type of thing. But that's not what they did, and it probably wouldn't have looked as cool because they don't get the kind of budgets. Usually, they've always been talk about movie budgets for a TV series or streaming series. I think those days are going to have to come to an end because they burnt a lot of money chasing after crap. So that's the way it is. So that'll have to be reserved for movies. But boy, you've got to have something to keep the excitement for this. What's even though it's not Star Wars or what have you, but it's still supposed to be this sci-fi spectacular, and it delivers at moments, but far too in between, and so it's unfortunate because there's a lot about it that I like. It's interesting, but I said, I need to make time to watch the part one again, and I just I'm good. So at some point I'll watch them together, I'm guessing. But not anytime soon, and I wish it weren't the case, but it is. The performances are fine. I'm not all that impressed with the two leads here. I don't see the fascination with is it Chalamet? How you say his name? I was really taken aback with the guy who plays Fade. Boy, did he look bizarre and weird, almost like a horror movie creature. Well, the whole Harkonian family looks like horror movie creatures. Those were, disgustingly or hideously interesting. Stuff like that was cool. And I was like, hey, and after a while I realized, oh, Fade, that's the guy who played Elvis. He doesn't look like Elvis in this one. Which is interesting because Sting played Fade in the Lynch movie. So, hey, connection to rock singers, But anyway, not much of a recommend on my part. There's intrigue. There's a lot to be curious about. There's some fascinating elements, but I don't know. I mean, I've said similar things about the Snyder DC films, as I did enjoy those, despite the fact that I found them considerably flawed, except perhaps the Justice League one. But in here, it would almost reach the same conclusion, but the flaws, primarily the boredom and blandness, it's pretty steep. And then this pushing me right out of the story with Zendaya, its character. That's just one too many. So if you enjoyed it, I can understand it to some extent why you did, and that's good for you. But so maybe third time will be the charm if it gets the chance. It depends on how it performs. Maybe it'll do very well because it's quality enough compared to other crap. There's a majority of crap movies these days. So maybe it'll rise above and have a chance for a sequel. And maybe that one will prove far more intriguing and interesting. But overall, I'm more akin to the idea that Dune needs to be a series, a streaming series, I guess now, rather than a television one. But that approach, I think, would do well for it, like a Game of Thrones in space, So anyway, there you go. Dune Part 2.